Madam Chair, you want to start?
Well, first of all, just wanting to say thank you to JaMinn and the CSA for the invitation, and how glad we are to be here. I thought as the presentation went up of the title of this evening's presentation, Tainted Paradise, and it just is a reminder for me of how passionate I am about my country, and how hard it is sometimes to speak about the problems that we face, the challenges that we face, and that often we are accused of washing dirty linen in public, but our position has always been, if you can't face the problem, if you can't speak directly and openly about the problem, then you're not going to be able to solve the problem. So this is one of the reasons that we are here.
Yeah, and it's, first of all, thanks to Alexis and JaMinn Link. The arrangements have been superb and everything has worked well. Caribbean students, Kwame Gale and his team, thank you as well. I'm always grateful for the opportunity to leave Jamaica because it gives you an opportunity to go back. And when you go back and you land and you see the paradise that you're landing in, it reminds you what you hope for, what you long for, what you want to see in your country. And the chance to go home again, the chance to come out, to describe our land, to describe to those who know and to those who don't know, and to try to capture in words a country that is so complex, that is so brilliant, that is so beautiful, that has so many ugly pieces, that needs so much cleaning up, and how to have a conversation, how to engage everyone in a dialogue about acknowledging, as Susan says, the problems, not as a way of wallowing in them, not as a way of being ugly, but as a way of beginning the journey towards paradise. Because if we clean that up, if we get there with Jamaica, then there's nowhere that we can't fly.
I think we've been asked to talk initially about how we got involved in this organization, Jamaicans for Justice, which started in 1999. And since Carolyn was there at the very beginning, and I only came on board a few months later, I think that she would be best to talk about how she got involved.
And life is really funny. I mean, there are moments that you make choices that you don't even know where they're leading you. And Jamaicans for Justice grew out of the gas riots in 1999. And the choice that I made was to stop at a demonstration that was on the road. The gas riots in Jamaica occurred when the finance minister got up in Parliament and said, I'm going to put X amount of tax on the price of gas and it'll start tomorrow. And people just said no. And they stood up in Halfway Tree Square that afternoon and there was a demonstration. And the next morning, there were pockets of demonstrators right across the city. And I was going to work, and there were some right in this gas station at the bottom of the road where I live. And I said, no, I'm going to work. And there were people that I knew, and I went to work. But by the time I got to work, the city was gradually locking down. And you had more and more accounts of roadblocks and people standing up with placards and some violence, unfortunately. So nobody was going to come to my office. And I closed up, drove up the road. And this time I stopped at the gas station. And for those who know Kingston, for those who know Jamaica, there is most often beside great wealth, a district of great poverty. And Barbican is no different, Barbican where this gas station was. And the gas station is one side of the road, and behind it is Jack's Hill, and lots of very wealthy people, and access to a lot of very wealthy areas across the hill. And on the other side of it is the working class, and sometimes inner city communities, right there, right across the road. And on this day that I stopped, the road was the perfect metaphor for Jamaica's problems. Because on one side of the road were people with placards who were clearly middle class. And on the other side of the road, people with placards who were clearly working class. And the two were separated, the two groups, separated by this road. And they stayed that way for hours. And the placard said the same thing. No taxation, no taxes, roll back, lockdown, both sides of the road. But those two groups of protesters couldn't speak to each other. The divide in the Jamaican society, class, money, culture, was huge, and that road was that metaphor. But by the end of that day, a few brave souls had made their way across the road and were talking to each other. And then more came, and then more people, and then more people. And then all of a sudden, we were having a grand meeting inside that gas station. And it turned into a party. People the next day, everybody turned up back with their placards. People came over the hill with bag juice, for those Jamaicans, juice in a bag. and day old bread that nobody could go to sell. And somebody turned up the car stereo, and Peter Tosh was blasting, and Bob Marley, and Revolution music. And we had a party. And it was amazing. It felt so right. Somehow we were all together. Somehow we were all challenging authority. Somehow we were all saying, together we can do this differently. It lasted another day, and then it kind of petered out. But that was a genesis of Jamaicans for Justice, because at the end of it, a couple of us got together and said, can we articulate what happened there? Can we articulate the feeling? Can we see a way forward for Jamaica? Can we see a way that doesn't involve rioting and roadblocks and looting? Can we see a way to get engaged in governance? And from there, 20 of us meeting, Monsignor Albert said, keep meeting, whatever you do, even if it's two people meet, because something will turn up. Some way forward will find itself. And then it did.
And that was in about July.
This was right after the gas riots in April. So by July, we were having events. We were having an event in the community to introduce ourselves. And right after that came the guys from the community who had been abused. And then right after that came Michael Gale, and that was August of that year.
And I often tell Carolyn jokingly that she's the reason I got involved. We were in high school together. She was a year ahead of me. We didn't really know each other. I knew of her. But then she was my children's pediatrician many years later. And I had begun to hear about this new group that was forming. And one morning, I was listening to a news and discussion program, The Breakfast Club. And on the program, Carolyn was on with one of the mothers that have figured so much in our work, Miss Jenny Cameron. And they were talking about the death of Miss Jenny's son, Michael Gale, who was in his 20s, suffering from a mental illness, and had come upon a police and military roadblock in his inner city community where there was a curfew being held one evening. And he had attempted to cross it. And, when a man comes to a police and military barrier and they ask him where he's going, and he says he wants to cross the barrier to go and buy some ganja, you know that this isn't an appropriate response. Something's not right. And what ended up happening was that he was beaten, savagely beaten and kicked by about 13 members of the security forces. And someone in the community who knew this was happening ran and told Miss Jenny, and she came to the scene and was begging for her son, who was being kicked, having water thrown on him to revive him, and then being beaten again.